I think we can all agree that it's painfully cliche, even smug, to say the best horror movies are human ones at heart. However, it's a sentiment I think is worth remembering because for a genre designed to provoke and attack our fears and vulnerabilities, it's also probably the most empathetic one. In a 2017 interview with AV Club, writer-director Oz Perkins described the use of horror in his directorial debut February, or more alluringly known as The Blackcoat's Daughter, as a Trojan horse. Perkins never conceptualized it as strictly a horror film. Instead, it's a brooding smokescreen designed to lure you into its tense, chilling, and somber atmosphere, only to constantly subvert your expectations with a tragic, albeit still terrifying tale about loss. The Blackcoat's Daughter tells the story of three girls whose lives begin to intersect in unexpected and inevitably shocking ways. The vast majority of the story focuses around an all-girls Catholic boarding school at the beginning of the semester break, where a freshman called Catherine awakens from a mysterious dream involving the death of her parents, while a rebellious senior student called Rose believes she might be pregnant and ponders whether to tell her loved ones or seek an abortion. It's established out the gate that both girls are consumed by worry, fear, and doubt, but for now, it's not exactly clear what's bothering Catherine, who slowly begins to exhibit strange and seemingly disturbing behaviour. Now, before we go any further, I do want to say that you should go into this movie absolutely blind. You will do yourself no favours knowing anything about what's to come. However, if you're bracing yourself for the horror that unfolds, let's take a quick moment to talk about this video's sponsor, Dave. Dave is a personal banking app that's leveling the financial playing field by fighting for you, the underdog, and taking on big banks in their predatory ways. Every year, Americans pay banks billions in overdraft fees, and Dave's goal is to make those fees a thing of the past by giving members what traditional banks won't: interest-free extra cash advances up to $500 with no credit checks or late fees. When you download Dave, you can advance up to $500 to help cover costs that make your life just that little bit easier, like getting fuel for your car, grocery shopping, paying for rent, or even an emergency visit to the vet because your dog managed to eat a whole box of chocolates you were saving for yourself. What? Surely we've all been there. You simply pay back when you get your next paycheck with no unnecessary fees attached, and with a Dave spending account, you can even control and manage how you budget. Dave is the banking app made for you, and with the cost of living being what it is these days, we could all use a bit of help sometimes. You can join millions of users today by downloading Dave at dave.com/ryanhollinger and get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. Again, no credit checks or late fees, and for terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve, member of the FDIC. Now, before I introduce our third protagonist, I want to go back to Perkins' interview because there are some interesting insights to better understand the vibe he's going for. The title of the film has always caused a bit of confusion because there's no actual mention of who or what Blackcoat refers to. The immediate instinct is to assume it refers to the surname of one of the characters, but Perkins basically explained it as just a cool sounding title. It's a lyric from an original song written by his brother Elvis, which Perkins interpreted as a potentially ominous religious motif that evokes a curious mental image of a girl wearing a black coat, distinctly like the protagonists in the film. In reality, February was the original chosen title to symbolize the heavy emotional impact certain times of year can have on those who reminisce on tragic events that profoundly shape their lives, such as the loss of a loved one, which of course the story slowly drifts towards. The film sets a brutally depressing tone that we're never alleviated from. It never veers into sensationalism or misery porn, but it is a very distinctly unhappy film, where its protagonists are constantly left feeling isolated and alone as they seek a solace that never comes. While it is typically sold as a demonic possession movie, it takes a good amount of time before it becomes finally framed as one, but even then, it's so fiercely subtle about it that you'll be left wondering if there's any real demon at all, given each of the three perspectives the story is told from are so uniquely subjective. In the first act, there's a chance you might find yourself a bit baffled where things are going, as it spends much of its time setting up Catherine and Rose as being left behind at the school when neither of their parents show up to take them home. Rose deliberately delays her parents so that she can figure out the situation with her pregnancy, while a borderline catatonic Catherine ruminates on the dream of her parents' demise as though it's a premonition. As such, the holdover staff encourage Rose to look after Catherine, but Rose naturally has other plans, creating an uncomfortable rift between them, despite the fact neither of them know each other. However, before the tension is explored, the act abruptly ends, just as Catherine receives a mysterious phone call we can only assume are her parents, taking us to the perspective of our third protagonist, Joan. Joan is immediately revealed as an escaped patient from a psychiatric hospital, where she seemingly left traumatized by unclear circumstances, and soon accepts the help of an innocuous older couple called Bill and Linda. Now, from the way I'm setting everything up, you can see how people might find the film frustrating in how it delivers information, because cynically looking at it, the twists and turns mainly work because it's simply withholding information rather than leaving things in plain sight. Of course, it's pretty standard practice in most mystery movies, but when I describe Perkins' contrived and convoluted approach to storytelling as an issue in his other films, the reason I find it works so well here is that the story is still the defining factor of the experience, and the themes just naturally gravitate around it. In other words, it's not as indulgent to the point of pretension, dare I say, while it does have the meandering feel of his other films where sometimes not all that much even happens. I find myself constantly on edge trying to get ahead of where the story seemed to be going. Granted, I imagine some folks will work things out pretty quickly, but there's this sweet spot in its ambiguity that leaves certain details up to interpretation, and thus there's a sort of residual eeriness that's left when the film ends. Back at the boarding school, Rose returns from meeting her boyfriend and begins to have a creepy feeling that someone or something is watching her. Assuming it's Catherine, Rose eventually follows a series of strange sounds to the school basement, and to her horror discovers Catherine seemingly praying to the fire igniting from the boiler. From here, the story intercuts between the mystery of Joan and Rose attempting to reluctantly comfort Catherine, who is coldly convinced her parents are dead, much to Rose's concern that Catherine is clearly troubled and in desperate need of help. Kiernan Shipka's performance is what truly sells the tension. There's such an outward innocence and vulnerability to her, but like Regan in The Exorcist, there's also a sense of menace in the tone of her voice, and her vacant stares are just the creepy cherry on top. What Perkins does so well is create this really rich intimacy where less is more. You just instinctively feel like you're trapped with someone you really don't want to be with. I think because you're so in the dark about what's happening, and other than the boiler room scene where you could assume Catherine is simply having a seizure, there's nothing tangible to suggest she's demonically possessed. Hell, the only reason I was quick to assume it was about demonic possession in the first place was because we're so overtly surrounded by Catholicism. In some ways, it is used ironically by having these girls be raised under the illusion of being watched over and protected by God, but you can't help but feel like they're abandoned as though in purgatory, which is a feeling described in Perkins' other two films. In fact, that feeling is crucial to how the film ends, as Perkins states he intended to create a feeling of emptiness that comes out of a desire to not be alone. I'll obviously explain it in the end, but what's key to Catherine is that regardless of the actuality, she's internally experiencing loss and desperately seeks to fill that void, and when Rose doesn't give it to her, it seems to make her increasingly antagonistic towards her. It's a theme that's mirrored back onto Joan, who after having visions of being shot by a police officer, is asked by Bill about her faith in God, before suggesting that God brought them together for a reason. There's an interesting tension established here where I wasn't exactly sure how to take Bill, because since we're seeing it from Joan's paranoid perspective, he's framed as a stranger who we can't fully trust. When Joan is later alone in the car with Linda, she's told about the grief both Linda and Bill experience at this time of year, as it's the anniversary of the death of their daughter, who died 9 years ago. And who is their daughter, you ask? Well, it's Rose. At this point, the timelines begin to make sense as Jones seemingly reminded Bill of his daughter, hence he felt a need to help her get closer to where she's going. But what's even more striking is that Joan is not her real name, but rather the stolen identity of a girl she killed prior to meeting these grieving parents. We then flash back to see Catherine have another seizure that finally reveals itself as a demonic possession. Kinda. The thing is, while some will call this reveal predictable, it's brilliantly the least surprising twist, because as I said, Perkins sees the horror as secondary to the mystery and character drama. I actually got some Memento vibes from how the story was structured, but going back to my Gretel and Hansel video and how I describe Perkins films as indebted to Hitchcock, you can see how he subverts the theory of suspense by letting the characters in on information the audience is unaware of to create fear and bewilderment within ourselves. Usually the effect is the reverse, and it's us that knows more than the characters, but soon we see another unheard phone call, which leaves the nuns concerned and soon calling the principal back to the school along with the police, to which they discover something ghoulish unbeknownst to us. The dread that the story has been building towards finally reveals itself when we flash back to our first day with Catherine, where we learn a demon has been towering over her this entire time. What we see from her perspective is merely a brooding shadow in the corner, implying it could simply be all in her head, and what we're witnessing is nothing more than a psychotic breakdown that doesn't have a clear-cut explanation. The mysterious phone call from early in the film wasn't her parents, but a demon telling her to kill all those around her. As for Rose's pregnancy, it turns out to be false when she has her period, but it only slightly softens the blow of what's to come when Catherine arrives and viciously stabs her to death in full Michael Myers mode, and returning to the shock horror of the principal, we discover she's also brutally murdered and beheaded all three women. In a further jarring twist, the police officer from Joan's vision soon arrives and finds Catherine worshipping the boiler in a manic state as though peering into hell itself, thus confirming one thing for certain: Joan and Catherine are the same fucking person. Now, like I said, I know there are many Sherlocks out there who will figure this out, and all the credit to you, but I was just so enamored by the atmosphere that it never dawned on me. Like, I can kinda see how Emma Roberts and Kiernan Shipka look the same 9 years apart, but before you have much time to think about it, there's another twisted irony to Bill's words about God bringing these two together. Depending on your faith, you can say it was actually Satan that made this arrangement possible, or maybe it was simply all a coincidence. Either way, Catherine proceeds to brutally murder and decapitate both parents and bring their heads back to the school, while the flashback sees Catherine's tutor priest perform a seemingly successful exorcism as she begs the demon not to leave her alone. The bleak and shocking reality is that Catherine never overcame her demons, so to speak, and ever since she's been destined to reconnect with it to overcome what she sees as the real demon in her life, her profound loneliness. Returning to the boiler room, she attempts to reignite the flames and summon back her demon buddy, but tragically to no avail. The film ends with the symbolic gesture of a deeply distraught Catherine breaking into tears on a cold, empty road. She's once again abandoned and alone, and all she has left is an empty, unfillable void that will forever remain. Because for her, what is the world worth when there's no love left in it to warm her soul?
Diddle, diddle, Blackcoat's daughter, what was in the holy water? Gone to bed on an unclean head. The angels, they forgot her. Diddle, diddle, Blackcoat's daughter, what was in the holy water? Gone to bed on an unclean head.